Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the March 17th, 2022 Baltimore City Planning Commission meeting. I'm Sean Davis. I have the pleasure of chairing the commission. Sitting somewhere here in Baltimore is Chris Ryer, the Director of Planning and Secretary for the Commission. Secretary Ryer, could you please call roll?
Certainly, sir. Robin Allen.
Present.
Ted Carter.
Present.
Victor Clark Jr.
Present.
Marcia Collins. Ms. Collins?
You might have stepped away as well.
Yeah, okay, I'm showing her here. The Honorable Eric Costello.
Present. Go Hoosiers.
Talib Horn.
Present. Gonzaga.
Shout to Thomas Previs, just to make sure. Eric Stevenson.
Present. Seton Hall.
And Sean Davis.
Present. Go Red Raiders. All right. Let's see if Marcia is returned. Marcia, you there? Okay. We have before us our meeting minutes from our March 3rd, 2022 meeting. Do I have any questions or comments regarding those? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Warren. Second.
Second.
Oh, hold on a second.
That's a question.
Yep. Deputy Mayor Carter.
Point of order, the secretary.
I think that was Horn, wasn't it? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think Deputy Mayor Carter's has a question, but I can barely hear you, Ted. Oh, and now you're on mute. Going once. Going twice. Okay. I think we had a motion to approve by Commissioner
Yeah,
Horner.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to confirm with the secretary my presence at that meeting. I think it records he as being absent or not voting on any of them.
No, it shows you as being present. Arriving for briefing was excused at the start of the registration return for item number 7. Is that fair? Ted?
Yeah, we'll go with it. I don't.
I can't remember. I know you had to step away because you had a meeting. I can't remember which exact item you had.
Okay. Well, that's fine, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So with that, we have a motion from Commissioner Horn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Allen. Anyone opposed to this motion? Anyone abstaining from this motion? All others approve of this motion?
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
Under our consent agenda, we have 2 CIP transfers. The first is the February 16th, 2022 meeting of the Board of Estimates. There were 19 items included in that. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding those? No, we're going to come back to that, Eric, if you would. Sorry, I jumped ahead. So if you want, we'll be back to the tutorial. Anybody have any questions or comments regarding the February 16th CIP transfers? Do I have a motion?
So moved, Commissioner Horn.
Thank you,
Second.
Commissioner Horn. I think that was a second by Commissioner Allen. Anyone opposed to this? Anyone would like to abstain from this? All others are in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
Then we have the March 16th, 2022 Board of Estimates meeting. There were 15 items. There's a new reporting system, by the way, Chris, and I think that new reporting system worked out really well. Anybody have any questions or comments? If not, do I have a motion?
So moved, Commissioner Horn.
Thank you, Commissioner Horn. Second.
Clark seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Anyone opposed to this? Anyone abstain? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, before we dive into our regular agenda meeting, Mr. Pisa, would you please go through the WebEx tutorial?
Certainly, sir. And maybe what I need to do is just swap the order of the consent agenda since it just seems to flow better the other way. I'll try and remember to do that for next time. So welcome everybody.
If you do it, then I'm going to screw it up the other way, so it doesn't really matter.
49-51 split, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the typical virtual meeting rules, every member of the public will enter the meeting muted and will remain so until called upon for testimony by the chair. We'll have staff presentations and then they'll ask for commentary afterwards. If you are interested in speaking on a particular item, just use the raise hand feature, which is in the participants panel. So if you click that button in the bottom right corner, it looks like a person with a little stack of papers. That'll open that, and then you should see a hand to be raised in a drop down at the bottom right corner of that panel. If you're not able to find that, or if it's just not working for you, you can also put your comments into the chat box and capturing that text for the record, and it's just as good as speaking verbally. Next slide. And that shows you a little bit of the controls across the bottom of the screen. Our panelists on the commission today will have the ability to unmute and mute themselves as they so wish. The members of the public won't be able to do that until called upon. And then there's the participants button in the chat on the bottom right side. Next slide. For some of the viewing options, if you click on that little pop-up button on the top right corner of the visible part of the screen, which has the slides on it, you can change some of the viewing options, whether you'd like to see everybody's cameras or if you'd like to pop it out into a floating panel. There's some options there for you. Next slide. And there's the participants panel that'll pop up on the right-hand side. You're looking for that little hand. Please remember, once you're done speaking, you have to click that little hand and put it back down. That'll take it off of our little list that we see, which catches people in order as they raise their hand. It'll keep things tidy for us as we're moving forward. I believe that will be our presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tiso. With that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Ryer for our regular agenda.
Yes, thank you, sir. The first item on the agenda is fiscal year 2023 through 2028 Capital Improvement Program recommendations. Kristen Ahern will present.
Good afternoon. Eric or Tamara, do you allow me to share slides? Go.
Coming your way.
Hold up for you. All right. And are you seeing the correct screen?
Yep, you got it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all. So good afternoon, commissioners. I'm here today to present the recommendations for the fiscal 23 to 28 Capital Improvement Program. As you know, City Charter requires the Planning Commission to submit a recommendation for the 6-year CIP. The first year becomes the basis for the capital portion of the city's budget or the Ordinance of Estimates, and we start the 6-year program again each year. BOE policy states what a capital improvement is. It's a physical betterment or improvement, and preliminary studies related. It is nothing costing less than $50,000, not vehicles, not repairs or maintenance unless it's $100,000 or more, and it is not salaries. So we've had quite a bit of work leading up to this. In August, we had a public information session. In October, you heard City School CIP request and approved it. That's now incorporated into the overall CIP. On November 18th, you voted on the loan authorization. Agencies formulated requests and submitted them in December. In January, we heard from the agencies about their requests. And 2 weeks ago, we presented initial recommendations. So you're here today to vote on this set of recommendations to forward to Board of Estimates. It will then go to Board of Finance, Board of Estimates, and finally the first year will go to City Council as the budget. Looking over time at trends, you can see this year we're recommending $742,383,000 for the fiscal 23 capital budget. The capital budget does tend to be variable from year to year. And this is how it breaks out by fund source. As always, Department of Public Works, utilities make up the largest portion of the budget and that's reflected in the county grants and revenue loans. Federal funds were also significantly higher than normal this year, so that's a very large portion. And then we tend to focus on what we call the general fund backed sources. So these are the sources over which the city has the most discretion, which aren't typically dedicated to a very specific purpose or project, but those that go to meet the city's highest priority needs and fund things for which there's no other source. And so this is exciting. We had $185,500,000 this year to program, which really will help us make some progress on some of the capital needs we have across the city. And just a reminder that the $80 million in GO bonds that we program each year has to follow the constraints of the loan authorization, which this year was $18 million for community and economic development, $7 million for affordable housing, $36 million for public infrastructure, and $19 million for schools. We updated the evaluation criteria this year to those shown on the screen. Because there was so much general fund money, this wasn't as meaningful as perhaps it might have otherwise been, because we were able to recommend funding nearly everything that agencies requested. But these are the guidelines and the things that we want to communicate to agencies that are important to us in capital projects. So by agency, here's how the fiscal 23 recommendations break down. Of course, Department of Public Works, $361 million, by far the largest. And Department of Transportation, Department of Housing and Community Development are always right behind it with significant state and federal funds. Recreation and Parks this year, the set of recommendations includes about $38 million through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And so that's why that is so large this year. And then Department of General Services is quite large. This includes $40 million in general funds, kind of a one-time source to make some progress on some of our public safety facilities, both fire and other public safety facilities. And then you have Public Works, Solid Waste, City Schools, BSIT, BDC, the library system, and mayoralty. So to jump into the agency recommendations, for Baltimore City Information Technology, we're recommending about $7 million. The only request that we would not recommend funding is 117075. This was a request for some supplies for their call center, things like laptops, which it just can't be funded, should not be funded through the capital budget. Over the 6 years, you'll see more of the same cybersecurity upgrades, infrastructure, application upgrades, and then you'll also see some projects for the mainframe components. In the mayoralty category this year, you have awards made through the Cultural Spaces Capital Support Fund, and in the outer years of the program. Oh, and sorry, and this is a map of where those allocations are, where those commitments are. And then in the outer years, you'll see continued support for that program, which allows us to contribute to improvements at cultural spaces in the city. Department of General Services, we were able to fund nearly everything. So city buildings, fire stations, police stations, nearly everything they've requested. And other city facilities, city-owned buildings. We would not recommend funding for the Druid Health Center roof replacement. We'd recommend that entire facility be replaced or relocated. And as we've discussed, that is studies and planning for that are underway right now. And also the 101 West 24th Street HVAC upgrade and replacement. We believe this is another building that should be considered for disposal from the city's inventory. The gunpowder range replacement, the agency had asked for general fund sources. We are recommending funding for that. That is something that the city has applied to the state to fund. And then you'll see there are a few items where we were able to add a little bit of additional funding. The Southwest and Northeast District female locker rooms and bathrooms, that should get the entire project funded so they can start moving on those. And then you'll notice the one-time allocation of 40 million for fire department and other public safety facility improvements. The total for Department of General Services is 60,865,000. And then within the library system, we'd recommend fully funding the Forest Park Library renovation and deferring the Clifton branch funding until next year. There's also 500,000 in local impact aid for the Park Heights Library. So this is where the DGS investments are for fiscal 23. In the outer years, you'll see funding to complete the City Hall stone wall upgrades. You'll see courthouse windows. You'll see major system replacements, very expensive system replacements at some of the large downtown office buildings, and then continued fire and police station upgrades. In the 6 years of the library system, you'll see a full funding for the Clifton Library renovation, and then Hamilton and Herring Run would be the next in line based on what the libraries have requested. Baltimore City Public Schools, you've already seen this and approved it in October, but you'll notice funding for Marie G. Faring, Furley Elementary and Armistead Gardens, total renovation or replacements, and then a significant amount for systemic improvements, roofs, windows, doors, HVAC, fire systems at various schools throughout the school system. And this is where those local funds are anticipated to go between those major projects that I mentioned and some of the systemic projects. Over the 6 years, you'll see complete funding for those for Marie G. Faring and Furley. This should be the last increment of funding needed for Armistead Gardens. And you'll see renovations for Benjamin Franklin and Edmondson High School. Oh, I'm sorry, and additional funding for Armistead Gardens. And then you'll see continued funding for systemic improvements. Moving on to Department of Recreation and Parks, this is one of the few agencies where we would not recommend fully funding everything the agency has requested because they have a major award through the American Rescue Plan Act, and they'll need to focus on spending those dollars and getting those projects completed on the timeline for that funding, which is short. So in general, we'd recommend funding projects that have already started, that the agency needs additional funding to be able to get them fully funded and completed. That includes the Reptile House at Druid Park, Druid Hill Comfort Station, Chick Webb Rec Center, Walter P. Carter Pool, Robert C. Marshall Field, Garrett Park. Cap Callaway Legend Square Park, the Palm House, the Rawlings Conservatory. There are only a couple projects we'd recommend starting new. Those include Faring Baybrook Park and the Middle Branch Trail design. But for the most part, we would not recommend that the agency start new projects with city general funds. So again, we're recommending 7.4 million in general funds, but over 60 million for the agency overall. And this is where those investments are projected to go. The red is the FY23 capital budget, and the other colors represent the American Rescue Plan Act improvements. Over the 6 years, you will see some new major projects that the agency wishes to start. So they would do phase 2 of Bocheck Park. They're looking at Canton Waterfront Park, major improvements at North Hartford, Madison Square, Druid Hill, Herring Run, City Springs, Middle Branch, Solo Gibbs, Leon Day, and Florence Cummings. And then the Druid Hill post-reservoir improvements. That's been in the works for a while. They've dedicated some funding to design and planning and would put in those outer years some larger amounts to construct the improvements. Moving on to the Department of Transportation, again, we were able to fund everything that they requested. And then with the addition of the additional dollars from the infrastructure bill, some projects are funded at a higher level than what was requested. And so anything green here you can see is funded at a higher level than what was requested. So they have bridges, pedestrian, bike, and transit facilities, major route reconstructions and safety improvements. I will just note that when they added the infrastructure bill funding, they looked at project schedules to see what could be accelerated. And in doing that, they did notice some that didn't need the funding right away. So you'll see 2 that have slightly less than what was requested. And that was just kind of as they were rearranging things for the infrastructure bill, accommodated that. There's funding for resurfacing, various communication upgrades from the Transportation Management Center to signals and other communication infrastructure. And then, as I mentioned in your briefing, the conduit enterprise, they've revised their funding request downward from what they originally requested. So we're recommending a total of $34.7 million in general fund back sources and $119.5 million total. And this is where some of those projects that could be mapped are projected to go. Over the 6 years of the transportation program, you'll see $3 million per year in general funds dedicated exclusively to Americans with Disabilities Act investments and improvements. You'll see bridges and major route reconstructions. I do want to point out that there were some new projects that weren't in their request that they were able to add to the 6-year program as a result of the infrastructure bill. So Howard Street Bridge, that should be 25th Street and Huntington Avenue, Pennsylvania Avenue corridor improvements, and Orleans Street rehabilitation are now in the program and were not previously. You'll see funding for the Greenways Trail and then traffic signal and communication upgrades. Department of Public Works Solid Waste, again, they requested $17 million in general fund sources, and we were able to fund nearly all of what they've requested. You'll see we're showing that we're not funding the solid waste facility renovations, and that's only because we've put that funding into specific projects. So $1.5 million for health and safety improvements at all facilities across the city, and $7.8 million for the Southeast Sanitation Yard, and $8.1 million for the Western Sanitation Yard. And this is where those improvements are located. Across the outer years of the solid waste program, you'll see continued funding, $3 million per year for the Quarantine Road landfill expansion. You'll see funding set aside each year for a new East Side transfer station, and then funding for an Inner Harbor facility, which the agency noted in its presentation that they've outgrown the current facility. The Department of Housing and Community Development, again, we were able to fund nearly all of what they requested. So you'll see stabilization, demolition and stabilization and associated activities. You'll see funding for affordable housing for some of the large redevelopment projects like Southeast Baltimore, and then some of their ongoing programs, the low-income mortgage program, housing upgrades to benefit seniors, community catalyst grants, and then more of the same. There were 2 projects specifically that we were able to fund at higher levels than requested, Johnson Square and Penn North Site Assembly. That should allow the agency to have the full amount of funding it needs to get those projects completed, their commitments there completed. And then there's additional funding through the Pimlico Community Development process with Pimlico Local Impact Aid. And I'll note too, $20 million for construction of City Springs Elementary. This is programmed through a 108 loan, which would be administered by HCD. as part of the PSO Choice project. And this is where some of these investments are programmed to go. You can see we have middle neighborhoods shown where that line item would go in brown here. City-owned properties, and then the impact investment areas are outlined. Over the 6 years, you'll see continued stabilization, demolition, acquisition, rehab, continued programs, the Affordable Housing Fund, the Southeast Baltimore Redevelopment Project, and then some of the other projects you'll see in the specific projects that you'll see in the outer years are the Rayner Brown and Poppleton projects. Baltimore Development Corps, we're recommending $4.2 million in general fund back sources and $6.8 million in total sources. We would recommend funding a few major projects that they've undertaken: Frederick Avenue streetscaping and Northwood Commons streetscaping. And then the final increment, what should be the final increment of funding needed for Lexington Market. Otherwise, we'd recommend continued funding for some of their programs, facade improvements, industrial and commercial financing, and innovation fund. We would not recommend general fund sources for Warner Street Entertainment Corridor, but there is local impact aid dedicated to that project. And then Inner Harbor Infrastructure, they have a large balance, and business parks tends to be more of an operating item. So this is where those investments are located. Over the 6 years, you'll see continued funding for those programmatic items, funding for the microloan program, Metro West realignment, and then funding for Madison Park North development project. Which brings us to the DPW utilities. You've just heard from DPW about their stormwater program, so you'll see some of that reflected in the CIP. This set is for kind of more of the gray infrastructure, the drainage improvements, and things to address flooding. And then this next set is kind of more of their pollution and erosion control or environmental projects. So you'll see stream restorations, environmental site design, and then some outfall repair. Here's a map of those fiscal 23 investments. And again, you'll see a lot related to drainage, stream restoration, flooding, all of it towards compliance with the city's MS4 permit. In the wastewater program, you're seeing a combination of what they call utilities and facilities. So projects to improve the pipes and mains in various locations. And then you'll see some larger facility projects like the Back River egg-shaped digester rehabilitation. So here's the fiscal 23 map for wastewater. You'll continue to see consent decree improvements to pumping stations, treatment plants, and then main replacements and inflow and infiltration reduction. One item that doesn't fall into either of those categories, you'll see funding set aside for the Patapsco administration building as well. And the water utility, it's similar. You'll see improvements at the plants like Ashburton and Montebello, and then urgent needs, infrastructure, rehabilitation and improvement, and some water main replacement. Some of that is responsive to known issues, and some of that is proactive replacement based on the condition of the asset, based on their asset management program. So a total of $126.7 million for the water program. You'll see again over the 6 years, there are items for Montebello Reservoir improvements, water main replacements. There are improvements at pumping stations, dams, and watershed bridges. You'll see a watershed comprehensive plan, and then some funding set aside to renovate their 210 Guilford building. So that's it for the agency-specific renovations. I just want to touch really quickly on our equity analysis, which is a work in progress. And I'm sorry, my screen just went blank, but hopefully you're seeing these maps. And so we've started to look at where these investments are located geographically. And so we take the 56 based on a methodology set out by the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. We take all the dollars budgeted in the CIP and we look at the community in which they were budgeted. And so these maps show you kind of the darker colors, which communities have more investment through the CIP going into them. On the left, you have the Department of Public Works projects specifically, and then on the right, you have everything except Department of Public Works. So this one would include transportation, rec and parks, Department of General Services, housing and community development, et cetera. And based on this, we look at where the allocations are going and the neighborhood in terms of the neighborhood demographics. And so we take the communities and we split them up into quartiles based on race and income. And so this is what the DPW allocations look like in terms of the quartiles, in terms of the race quartiles. And so if all things were equal, each of these segments of the bar would be an equal size. So this is for DPW. This is for all other investments. And then we look also by income. So again, taking the quarter of neighborhoods with the highest median income, middle, and the lowest median incomes, and looking at how they relate to each other. So this is for Department of Public Works based on income, and all other investments based on income. And so we will continue to dig into this data, and in the spring, we'll publish a report and submit a report to City Council detailing our equity analysis and providing a lot more context and explanation and analysis on this, but wanted to give you at least a preview so that you understand the decisions that you're making today and how that breaks down, kind of looking at the demographics of the different neighborhoods in the city.
Thank you very much, Kristen. So let's go through the commission first with questions. Actually, before we do that, can you spend, I know there's probably a lot of people on the attendee list who are really focusing in on the Falls Road and Northern Parkway intersection. I got a lot of letters regarding that. Can you just focus in specifically on that to address some of those questions that we've heard and what is being proposed by DOT for that?
Sure. I'll just note that we're recommending fully funding DOT's request. That's at $1.6 million for fiscal 23, and that would be to do some design and engineering as well as immediate improvements related to the sidewalks, bus stops, crosswalks, and some state of good repair on the bridge. And then we're showing $3.4 million programmed for fiscal year 26.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. All right. So questions, Commissioner Allen, any questions for Kristen?
No, it's a lot, but no. No,
Great.
thank you.
Deputy Mayor Carter? Okay.
And thanks, trying to get off mute here. Very good presentation, Kristen. Just at a top line, as you do the equity analysis, I don't want to get a lot of detail, but just give us a sense of how the allocation this year has compared to other years in terms of the investments by geography. You can speak to that.
Sure. I would have to go back and look at the maps across years, but all of these charts show kind of how they break out across the different demographics over the years. And so I always feel encouraged to see, the quarter of neighborhoods with the highest percent of Black or African American residents kind of gotten more investment over time in some of these in the past couple years. And then I think we've really seen too, some of the middle neighborhoods in terms of income represent a larger share of the investments over time. So I find both of those trends somewhat encouraging.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Great. Commissioner Clark?
Yeah, mine was going to be somewhere around the equity questioning too. You just stated when a report is due in December. Is that this coming December?
I think it's due in June. So
Oh,
it'll
okay.
be in the next couple of months we'll submit.
All right, that's what I thought. Okay, I thought I heard December.
I might have said December, but it should be in the spring. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Commissioner Collins?
No questions. I just want to thank staff for being so flexible and responding to some of the concerns that were expressed throughout this process, and for helping us fully understand the supplemental opportunities that were presented under the current situation. So I just thank the staff tremendously for all the hard work that they perform. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Councilman Costello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, Kristen, want to thank you and staff. Excellent report, as always. It's very helpful to get a better citywide perspective on where we're proposing to spend funding. I have one question and one comment. First, on the comment, I want to thank Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, who represents the 6th District, for bringing the issue of Northern Parkway and Falls Road to everyone's attention. I know that Council Vice President Middleton has been working very diligently in the background with leadership at the Department of Transportation as well as the Mayor's office to ensure that we get the right recommendation here. And I do believe that this is the right recommendation to ensure that that project is fully funded. My question is related to the slide that had DGS funding, specifically public safety facilities. I believe there was a $15 million line item. Kristen, if you could jump back to that real quick.
Correct. I don't know if your screen froze over there.
There we go. Can you give me a breakdown of the 15 million? And specifically, I'm interested in whether or not a portion of that funded is being allocated to the former Baltimore Sun building on the 500 block North Calvert Street, where we've moved significant portions of our entire public safety portfolio.
So this is a really late breaking item for us. This is $40 million in additional PAYGO that is being made available for public safety facilities. But the decision or the funds sort of became available for this very, very recently. So I don't have a lot of details at this point, but we have committed to coming back to the commission as we do get more details on the specific locations for this.
What's the source of the 40 million?
It's general funds.
So it's just PAYGO?
PAYGO. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, it is PAYGO. And right, as Kristen said, we don't have details yet, but we will come back as those are identified. I think part of the goal here is to match state funding. So there's a request for state funding for public safety facilities, and by having city funding, available as a match, that the chances of receiving the state funding would be better. So, kind of as that process moves forward, I think we'll get more details.
So the intent of the allocation is to ensure that we're meeting a potential match to ensure that we're eligible for state funding, correct?
I think that is at least part of it. Yes.
Okay, that's great. I would ask staff to please be sure to work with the administration closely on any additional needed improvements at the former Baltimore Sun site. We've made some great progress there, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of bringing additional public safety functions there to consolidate them and have those folks all in the same place. So would certainly appreciate that as you start to think through recommendations for that total bucket of 40 million. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course. Councilman Horn, Commissioner Horn.
Just some comments. First comment is I second everybody in terms of the planning staff, Kristen and Sarah. Job well done. But I also want to thank all the departments and all the work that they did. I thoroughly enjoyed all the presentations. I thought it was well thought out. And I think they're getting better every year. I know when I originally came on the commission, equity wasn't really part of the criteria. And it was really not something that every department did on a consistent basis. But now on all the presentations, I think equity is a criteria and it's really thought out. And so I appreciate that. Second thing is, I thought it was well done how a lot of the agencies integrated the ARPA funding in terms of the prioritization and sequencing of the projects. That could have been difficult, but I thought particularly with Recs and Parks, there were some decisions that were made and it made sense with ARPA funding. So enjoyed all the presentations. I think they're getting better. And I think I think everybody did a good job of really focusing on equity and then also the integration of some of these once in a lifetime funding we're getting from ARPA.
Thank you, Commissioner Horn. I see Commissioner Priebus has joined us. Tom, do you have any questions regarding the CIP?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. If you can hear me, I want to thank Kristen and Sarah as always. I really do appreciate how much effort goes into not just doing the CIP every year, but also to improving it and really looking for ways to improve it and looking for ways to encourage agencies to ask hard questions and think hard about it. So I'm just very impressed with that group and what a wonderful job they do for the planning department and for the city. And I also want to thank Councilman Costello, Councilman Middleton, and also Delegate Sandy Rosenberg, who was helpful to me, at least in terms of understanding better the Falls Road issue, and even Ms. Collins. And I'm really happy to see that resolved. So full support, and thank you very much for everyone.
Commissioner Stevenson.
No questions. Thank you.
And I have no further questions for you, Kristen. Thank you for an excellent job, as always. Let's turn it over to the public for any public comment. I'm not seeing any hands up, so while people may be putting their hands up or entering.
Mr. Chair, we do have one hand from Mary Kay Bettafarano.
Oh, I see that now. Great.
Yes. Hello, and thank you for inviting the public. I do need to let you know that we all experienced tremendous difficulty logging in today, and I had to contact Eric directly to get us a new link. The links on your website were not working. There are several folks who are limited to attending by the phone today, which is going to be difficult because I can't see anything. I would like if you could place up the slide because I missed it entirely trying to get on to the meeting. If you could put up the slide that shows the Falls Road project under the Department of Transportation.
I mean, all you're going to see is a line item.
Okay.
That identifies that this year in 2023, $1.6 million has been dedicated at DOT's request to fully fund DOT's request. And then $1.6 million will be spent on planning and design of the Northern Parkway, Falls Road, and 93 ramps intersection and interchange improvements. About $750,000. That's a NEPA study, public engagement, final design, and permitting. There's the design and installation of ADA infrastructure improvements, including sidewalks, ramps, and crosswalks connecting to bus stops. That equates to about $100,000. With planning, design, and complete streets improvements on Falls Road, that's $150,000. For state of good repair improvements to the bridge structure, which is $600,000, and includes fence replacement, repair of parapets and jersey walls, lighting, signage, and clearing debris. For a total of $1.6 million, $320,000 from general obligation bonds, and $1.28 million from the federal. I would believe that would be the infrastructure fund. So you got $1.6 million in for fiscal year 2023. Kristen also identified that $3.4 million has been put in for fiscal year 2026, when additional improvements will be made because the various studies that are being funded for 2023 will be done and approved. And then we will have money allocated in 2026, $3.4 million has been put in for 2026 to make those physical improvements that are currently being planned and approved.
Thank you for clarifying that. What I'd like to point out, and thank you for approving the $1.6 million in this fiscal year, that's definitely more than the zero that was recommended prior to today. I believe that the 3-point-some million for fiscal 26 was already in your recommendations. And truly, the fully funding is $11 million. Unfortunately, Mead and Hunt did not correctly add up the figures that they put in their table 7 that we shared with you. So truly, fully funding is $11 million, and this sounds like we are being given $6 million. And what I'd like to share is that while we certainly applaud adding equity to your new criterion, one of the things looks like was failed to consider was the usage as applies to equity. And we did try to share with you all that the usage of this particular intersection is citywide, and that the data that the consultants used showed the neighborhoods beyond our boundaries are using this intersection at high numbers. So I would like to at least point that out about the equity criterion, that perhaps going forward you can consider that type of information. And it does appear that we still have $5 million that is missing. And, $1.6 million is not going to go very far in this next fiscal year. We're glad to have something, but there still is more needed. And to just clarify, this is not fully funding. I do believe there are others on the call that would probably also like to comment.
Thank you. All right, does anybody else? I don't have any questions for the speaker. Does any commissioner have any questions for the speaker? Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. I do not see any additional hands up, but there are a number of callers, as was mentioned. So Mr. Tiso, actually I have 3 callers in right now. So Mr. Tiso, will you unmute each caller sequentially? And
Absolutely. We actually only have 2. One of them is our friend from DPW. When I unmute the 2 remaining callers individually, you'll hear 2 beeps. That'll be your cue to introduce yourself to the commission if you wish to address them. If not, you can just say no thank you or no comment, and we'll put you back on mute and move on. So the first caller is unmuted now. Okay. The second caller, if you heard the 2 beeps, that's for you. All right. Nothing heard. That's all, Mr. Chair.
all right, seeing no further hands up from the audience, I close the public hearing for this. Is there any discussion or deliberation from the commission? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I think that was a joint so moved by Commissioner Allen and
Second by Costello.
thank you, Councilman Costello. Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Robin
so-
Allen,
Approve. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I know Councilman Costello was very involved in this. If it's possible to do this as a courtesy and then allow him to be the
Yes, let's switch that.
motion maker, please.
Yep, Mr. Tiso, if you, pardon me, motion by Councilman Costello, seconded by Commissioner Allen.
Got it.
Okay, so now with the roll call.
Ted Carter,
Approved.
Victor Clark,
Approved.
Marcia Collins,
Approve.
Eric Costello,
Approve.
Talib Horn,
Approve.
Tom Previs,
Approve.
Eric Stevenson, Eric Stevenson.
Oh, he dropped off, I see.
Lost him. Right. And Sean Davis.
But hold on a second. Eric is here. He might have stepped away. I approve. So the motion is approved. So let's move on to the next agenda item, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, the next agenda item is City Council Bill number 22-0200, Urban Renewal Amendment for the Central Business District, Amendment number 2, I'm sorry, in the 11th Councilmatic District. Caitlin Audette will present.
And we'll just need a moment to get the slides put back up. 1 moment.
Great.
Hey, good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I have to present to you City Council Bill number 22-0200, an amendment to the Central Business District Urban Renewal Plan, which has the purpose of amending the URP for the Central Business District to revise the signage provisions, waiving certain content and procedural requirements, making the provisions of this ordinance servable, and providing for the application of this ordinance in conjunction with certain other ordinances and providing for a special effective date. I am Caitlin Audette. The petitioner is the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore. There are multiple owners, and this is in the Downtown Planning District. I am also the community planner. Next slide. So here's a map showing the boundaries of the Central Business District URP, which broadly aligns with the downtown core of the city, but does not include the Inner Harbor. Next slide. So for some background, the Central Business District URP was initially approved by ordinance on May 25th of 2001. An amendment was approved by ordinance in 2006. Next slide. So the proposed changes to the URP remove conflicts between the existing URP and the North Harbor Area Special Sign Control, portions of which overlap. Additionally, the amendment removes temporary signs from the URP, which brings it into compliance with the updated zoning code. So the first change shown here includes the removal of general outdoor advertising signs from a list of prohibited uses. Next slide. And then the second alteration shown on this slide adds that the signage plan is an approving document and that the Planning Commission is the approval body. Next slide. So the third change states that in an event of a conflict, the signage plan would be the prevailing review document. Next slide. And the fourth alteration removes temporary signs from the URP, which are no longer allowed for the zoning code. Next slide. The URP includes Section N, procedures for changes in approval plan, and staff has found that these procedures are being met as the amendment is going through the ordinance process. As the changes do not affect a specific site or developer, as required in item 2, the posting notice and sharing of the amendment with community stakeholders meets the intent. Next slide. As for the equity analysis, the billboards will impact this, or the proposal will impact the surrounding community by allowing billboards to be installed within the boundaries of the URP. And the proposal will impact existing patterns of inequity. We don't really think it will impact existing patterns of inequity. As for engagement, Downtown Partnership of Baltimore has met with a variety of stakeholders throughout the area special sign control designation and signage plan process. And the need for this minor amendment was discussed during those meetings. How are residents who have been historically excluded from the planning process being authentically included? So downtown residents who have not historically been large in number have been included in the outreach completed by Downtown Partnership. And for internal operations, the change to this URP will not have an impact on staff workload or operations. Next slide. For notification, notifications were provided to Downtown Partnership, the Downtown Residents Advocacy Network, City Center Residents Association, and individuals who had previously contacted staff regarding the North Harbor Area Special Sign Control. Additionally, the applicant posted 3 notices throughout the URP boundaries and included the posting in the loop on their 15 kiosks around downtown. Staff recommends that the commission recommend approval of the amendment to the Central Business District Urban Renewal Plan to City Council. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Ms. Odette. Are there questions or comments for Caitlin? Let's start off with Commissioner Stevenson. Eric, do you have any questions for Caitlin?
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Priebus. Any questions for Caitlin? Commissioner Horn.
Yes, I have a question. Sorry. Miss Odette, 2 questions. The first question is, to what extent did the Planning Commission consider a repeal of the URP? And I asked that question because historically with Transform Baltimore, we were trying to limit the use of URPs, I think, and to align the zoning code with the practice without having a URP.
So that is definitely something that the planning department is interested in, and Councilman Costello can probably speak to this a bit more as well. I think we aren't quite ready to part with this URP at the moment, in part due to some of the protections it provides to notable structures, as well as to special districts, which are kind of in lieu of a CHAP district. So there's some demo controls and those kinds of things. So I think we'd like to maintain portions of that in another method before removing or repealing the URP. And Councilman Costello, I know, is also well-versed on this issue and may want to speak to it.
Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Caitlin. That is an accurate representation of my position on this. Commissioner Priebus, there are a number of these URPs in the 11th Council District, and my goal is to dissolve every single last one of them before my time in public office is completed, working closely with the community and other stakeholders as appropriate. As Caitlin mentioned, we're just not quite there yet. We have been engaged in discussions, Downtown Partnership and myself, along with Baltimore Development Corporation and other stakeholders. But I'm hopeful that we will be at a point where we can do that in the future. How near that is, I can't speak to that at this time.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. I'm excited, as I think everyone knows. I don't like having extra processes, so getting that's a really great initiative, and I appreciate you all undertaking it. The second question I had is when you conduct for a long time, the Baltimore's had a complaint that the downtown maybe doesn't feed back to the other neighborhood or something along those lines. I don't know if I have it exactly right, but when saying you're conducting the equity analysis, and then you're saying that you're also just contacting downtown residents, has there been any thought given to whether a downtown action, given that it's mostly a commercial and perhaps a taxing function, may also require some input from residents outside of downtown?
I think that's a fair assessment. I do know that residents downtown do feel overlooked often, and so I would want to make sure that they have a fair voice. But I think it is completely fair. Like, downtown is for all residents and visitors to the city as well. So I definitely take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Great. Commissioner Horn, any questions for Caitlin?
No questions.
Councilman Costello?
Excellent report, Caitlin. Thank you.
Commissioner Collins?
I don't have any questions, but just to kind of follow up on a Commissioner Prius' issue, do we have a sense, Caitlin, of how many urban renewal and PUDs we've got left in the city?
Yeah, I don't know offhand, but I do know that we have an internal working list in the city or in the planning department where we have, the dates they expire, what we, we're looking at it. It is the goal of the department to get rid of them, but there are, some of them have circumstances where it's more difficult to get rid of, or et cetera. So that is definitely a larger goal of the department. And again, Director Ryer might be able to speak more broadly about that.
I believe there are approximately 80, Commissioner. I can't tell you the exact number, though.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
There's about 40 listed on the Department of Planning website. Another acceptable answer to Commissioner Collins' question would be too many. Thank you.
Recognizing the majorities are in your district. I'm just kidding.
A lot of them are, sir.
Any other questions, Commissioner Collins?
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Commissioner Clark?
No questions to it. I think the presentation, again, focuses on the fact that Baltimore's a changing city. We're going from one dimension to another. And as we try to sweep old ideas under the rug and come up with new ones, that we're doing a fantastic job. Staff. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Clark. Deputy Mayor Carter?
No questions. Thank you.
And Commissioner Allen?
No, thank you.
I have no additional questions. Caitlin, thank you very much for your analysis and presentation. Looking at the attendee list, I am not seeing any hands up at this time, and I believe we now have two callers, one of which is our buddy over at DPW, Carol. So, Mr. Tisa, would you unmute the other caller?
Absolutely. Unmuting now. When you hear the two beeps, that's your cue to introduce yourself to the commission. Okay, thank you.
All right, not seeing any hands up on the callers. I would close the public hearing. Are there any discussion or deliberation amongst the commission? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
So moved, Costello.
Thank you, Councilman Costello. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Allen. Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Robin Allen,
Approve.
Ted Carter,
Approve.
Victor Clark,
Approve.
Marcia Collins,
Approve.
Eric Costello,
Approve.
Talib Horn,
Approve.
Tom Priebus,
Abstain.
Eric Stevenson,
Approve.
and Sean Davis.
Approved. Our last agenda item, Mr. Secretary.
The last agenda item today is the Port Covington area of special sign control and sign plan adoption in the 11th Councilmatic District. Tamara Woods will present.
I'm going to stop my video. So I'm actually sharing my screen. I don't want to disturb everyone. But good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Again, we are here with what would be your second area of special sign control sign plan adoption. This one is for the Port Covington area, and the petitioner is the Weller Development, and they are the owner. And the planning district is actually the Southern District with one of our newest community planners, Ms. Jasmine Kimball. So you heard a lot about areas of special signage control. I know Caitlin Audette walked through a lot at the last Planning Commission, but I want to revisit just a little bit and also introduce you to maybe some other parts of the sign code that are a bit more relevant to this particular signage plan. So just to summarize, the purpose of the ASSCs is really about doing a comprehensive signage plan for a commercial area that's really well thought out based on, you know, the vision or the branding of the area. So that is the general gist of why we are allowing the areas of special signage control. And just to walk through really briefly again, the sign plan must include a list of what sign types are being sought in the ASSC, the location and number of signs per lot or building, the maximum dimensions per sign, and the percentage deviation being sought in the area or height of the sign or in the maximum cumulative area of signs based on Table 17201 sign regulations and Table 17306 maximum cumulative area of signs. So just to revisit, this one is for Port Covington, but I want to just refamiliarize you with 17201, which is the sign regulations. And what you can see here is, and this is the setup for any zoning category, but we're here for Port Covington, which actually has their own zoning category, PC1 to PC4. So you'll always see on the left-hand column the zoning district, as well as what the sign type is, the approval method. In some cases, the sign is allowed in the underlying zoning. In some cases, it will say ASSC only. Then it has the maximum sign area, anything dealing with height that is very specific, maximum quantity. And one of the things I think that's really important to point out for certain sign types is one per tenant with direct ground floor access. And in other times, you will actually see a maximum sign area that's not a definitive area, but based on a factor of linear feet of a building frontage. So that's something that just kind of differs depending on the sign that you have. And then this right-hand section is dealing with what your percentage deviations, well, one, what types of signs are actually allowed in the ASSC, and then your maximum deviations, and that depends on the sign. As you can see, a freestanding pole sign can only get maximum deviation of 50%, where others can get 75%. And that's really based on truly on the type of sign style that we typically see. And your quantity deviations, you have the ability to approve however many signs that are appropriate for a sign plan. And this is really, really important because while BMZA can, outside of a sign plan, BMZA can vary the maximum sign area, they cannot vary quantity. So one of the perks of being in an ASSC is to really hone in on that area and decide how much signage is actually appropriate for that particular ASSC. The other piece that I'm not sure that you're really familiar with is the second table that a lot of people probably are not familiar with is 17306, which is the maximum cumulative area. The way I like to look at it is table 17201 is like the menu. These are all the things that you can choose. And 17306 is the budget. This is actually how much you have overall. And so this particular table kind of sets the cap on what you can do. And the only zoning categories that are actually in this particular table are the ones that have the ability to have an ASSC. So it doesn't mean you have to have one, but you have the ability to get it based on where ASSCs can be. So what we have here is if you're not in the ASSC, then you have your budget here. So any property within the area of special signage control gets a different type of budget depending on the category of electronic sign. Because if you remember from our briefing last time, the electronic signs really range from, category one that caps at 50 square feet going all the way up into the thousands. So this is really why we have this table to really prevent over signage on a building. So you take your menu and then you have your budget. So basically, as you add in a category of electronic sign, your budget increases because we know some of those electronic signs are really large. So for Port Covington zones, their budget, either if you're not, property's not in the ASSC or only dealing with the smaller electronic signs, they get 1,200 square feet. If you're adding in a category 3, you're up to 2,200 and so on and so forth. So a little bit about the background of Port Covington. This is the only area that was established in the new zoning code that went into effect in 2017. And as you can see on your screen, what it says in 17502 applicability, it's very clear the entire PC zoning district as mapped on the adopted zoning map as of June 5th, 2017 is designated as an area of special signage control. So while the area did not have to go through legislation to be established, it does still need the signage plan, which would be approved by Planning Commission, which is why we are here today. The second piece to understand, which is extremely relevant and is right now, it's at least different for other parts of the city, is we have the 2000, I just want to walk you back through a little bit of the approval. So 2019, this Planning Commission did what was actually really most crucial for Port Covington area, which was approve the subdivision that created the new street grid. So it was the realignment of Cromwell Street, the creation of Atlas Street, and established a block structure. So it created approximately 15 new parcels. And the piece that's extremely relevant because the signage plan talks about design is you all approved the final development plans for several of the parcels that we'll actually see today, which is E1, E5A, E5B, E6. E7 was approved at that time, but it's not part of the signage request. Since that time, a couple of the other sites have been approved. But one of the things that's really important is at the time of that approval, the staff report was very clear that no signage was being approved at that time. So this isn't a case where signage was approved per Planning Commission and we're going back. None was actually ever approved. So a little bit about the Chapter 1 plan that was established in 2019 is I'm just going to point out the parcels that I mentioned before. We have, I'll start here with E1, and then we have E5A, E5B, E6 is this combination here, and then E7, which will actually come back before you at a later date. Also, what you'll notice is the street grid, and I'm going to show this in a different slide as well, but you can see the established street grid, but also some of the private streets that were not subject to Planning Commission. So just to move in a little bit, when we talk about part of the findings of fact for the area special signage control sign plan adoption, talk about distraction or adverse impact due to traffic. So I just wanted to walk through a little bit about the street grid. And the reason I'm doing this is because Port Covington is actually under construction right now. The buildings don't yet exist. So this is a little bit of a different animal that we're seeing today. So a little bit about the street grid. So one of the biggest things is this curve represented the Cromwell Street that most people actually knew. As part of this planning process, the Cromwell Street was actually realigned to become a little bit of the existing curve here, but then it was straightened out. This blue actually represents kind of a quieting, more pedestrian nature. So the Cromwell that people have known has been bus route, traffic route, truck route, all of these, different things. That's completely changing. So you will actually have Cromwell Street for regular traffic, and then the intent is to slow it down. So that means the treatment, the streetscape, all of those things will actually become more of a pedestrian scale. While their traffic can go through it, is not meant to be the main drag anymore. The new main drag is actually Atlas. So I mentioned the creation of Atlas. So this is the new street here that connects to McComas and then to West Peninsula Drive. So basically what would happen now is all the truck traffic and kind of, larger vehicles, faster moving traffic would come down what's Cromwell, turn up, and actually take this new street. So Atlas is actually designed to carry trucks, is designed to carry the bikes. Well, all of them can carry bikes, but the load is actually moved northward. So what you can see in terms of siting of the buildings that you're reviewing signage for today is you have E1 that is actually situated north of Atlas Street and actually across the street from what is Triangle Park, which the commission, I think, approved in 2020. So it is actually a really interesting street in that this particular facade is responding to kind of the walkable nature of Port Covington with the understanding that it is adjacent to a street that is going to move larger vehicles in a little bit quicker traffic. But at the same time, this particular facade is adjacent or across the street from a park. So this is a much quieter street and intended to have more pedestrian movement in order to, go and play in the field or see movie night or all of the different events. The other piece that's really, really hard when you're working with a master plan that's phased in this particular way is what's existing. So this is the existing Baltimore Sun. So anything above or touching Atlas and what you're reviewing today is really just responding to what's existing, which is the Baltimore Sun property. So that includes your E properties, your E5s, your E6s, your E7s. So everything is basically, intended to be walkable, but the designs are definitely with kind of the main frontages along, Cromwell and along Atlas Street, with the understanding that there will be, and these are buildings that are just kind of designed in the round basically because they're full block, but understanding that some of the finishes might be different or the fenestrations might be different depending on where they face. And so a little bit about the sign plan structure. This particular sign plan that you have in your Wix site is about 40 pages long. So everything that I present to you today is going to be basically a summary of what you have there. And that includes the findings of fact, which I'm not going to do for each building because they're essentially the same. So I just summarize it at the end, which is why I wanted to spend a little time on the master plan. So you get a sense. So what we have today is really only the approval of these 4 buildings here. As I mentioned, E7 would come back at a later date. What you have is a common signage key that you see in the sign plan, and I've shown here, that points to the different sign types. These sign types align to what is actually in the zoning code, as well as the max deviation that's allowed for each of those particular sign types. And again, the quantity is per the approved sign plan. Each building has what's called a sign schedule that outlines the particular max area and the deviations for those particular individual signs, and they actually align to the key that is shown here. And then you have a second table, which is the quantity deviation table. So quantity deviations, of course, are not given as a percentage because you would be like, I need 500% more signs. So it really is just a straight number. And then each building will have a site plan and elevation attached to it in the sign plan. So we'll start with the first building, which is E1, which I noted is next to the park above Atlas Street. So I mentioned the boundaries before, so won't go through that. So we're at approximately 150 units, 20,000 square feet grocery store intended for the space, 3,600 ground floor retail, and about 1,000 parking spaces, 6 stories occupied, 7 stories of internal parking. So they have the bike parking. So this is the general, plan for the building that's under construction right now. And it's approximately 100 feet tall. So that means we're having taller floor-to-floors, and it's primarily brick with some cast stone, and there are balconies as well. So what does this particular sign plan propose for E1? And it's 25 signs, and we'll get to E1 because there is an amendment associated, but what you see is 25 signs, at least in what we have in the document. Most of the proposed signs fall within what would be allowed in the underlying zoning as far as size. There's category 3 electronic sign that is proposed as well. This particular sign type is only allowed in the area of special signage control. It is proposed to be a rooftop digital billboard, and it's approximately 50 by 200 is the max area, I guess dimensional area that they will want. Even though the sign is to be 800 square feet, they would work within this 1,000-foot boundary to figure out exactly what the configuration of that 800 square feet would be. The requested deviation in terms of size is 7% of the area. And then there's one 300 square foot sign projecting above ground floor, and this includes a 20% area deviation. There are no quantity deviations being requested, and the maximum cumulative area proposed for all of the signs is 1,438 square feet, which is well within the 2,200 square feet. And just reminding you, we use this number simply because they are asking for this one category 3 electronic sign. So this is just the example of the sign schedule that's actually in the plan that you have before you. And what you can see, it does list out the sign types and the location map. The location we'll get to in 1 second. And the square footage allowed per code, and it includes what they are requesting as far as the proposed max square footage, where a specific deviation for a particular sign. So you can see here the 7% and the 20%, the height allowed per code. So they do have that, which is for the most part not applicable in this case, in the proposed max width and max height. So this I'll say these max dimensions speak to what I said before. This is only setting kind of the boundary in which this, square foot would actually live. So while these numbers don't match what the calculation is, it allows them to, make it more narrow or make it more wide depending on what the tenant is that's coming in. And this is extremely important for this particular sign plan, because as I mentioned, they are under construction now and not all of the spaces are leased out. So we don't know who future tenants would be or what exact signage they would be. So this is just setting the parameters that Weller would actually use to go out when they're negotiating with future tenants. So I showed you the sign schedule with the key, the sign key. So this is on the site plan where each of those particulars, this is the repeat of the sign key. It shows on the sign plan where that particular sign type would actually occur. So each of these actually goes back to this location key. So you have, my screen is so tiny, I can't see all of it. So we'll just start here with the ES 1.1. So you would see, I'll show you that one's actually on the elevation, but it mirrors exactly the location. So you can see exactly what facade it's actually on. If it's on Atlas Street, which is here, this is the future Anthem Street. So you can see the location of the sign. And the same thing happens with the elevation. So this is a typical, so I mentioned the category 3 sign. And so that is to be a rooftop sign. And in this case, you can actually see the projecting sign that I mentioned. So all of this goes back to that same sign schedule and matches to what they are. Next is E5A. So this is the office building. So I showed you where that one is. That one's on the west side of the site, furthest west. So it's approximately 200,000 gross square feet with almost 10,000 square feet of retail and 187 square feet of office on the upper levels, and as well as a penthouse with conference space and amenity space. There is limited parking on site. And I should mention that building E1 has a lot of the parking that is carrying the load for some of the other buildings. So that is where you will see kind of the parking go down a little bit. The building, again, is primarily masonry with glazing and does have a green roof, and it's about 118 feet. So what are they proposing? So it's about 40 signs on this particular building. And again, this is majority of it is ground floor wall signs. That would be smaller, 25 square feet, and some projecting signs that would be 6 square feet. 3 larger 400 square feet above ground wall signs are proposed as well. And that would be utilized by the larger commercial tenants. And like E1, no area deviations. Well, E1 had 2, no area deviations being requested for the size of individual signs, but there are deviations being requested, a quantity deviation to add 1 additional wall sign above the ground floor from the allowable 2 signs to 3. And then there is a proposed 50% deviation for the max cumulative area being requested that would take the 1,200 square feet that's allowed to 1,800 square feet. And just walking through, I won't go through all of the tables. So this is the table that you have for E5A in your packet. And again, like E1, it outlines the exact same way in that the locations are identified on the site plan and the elevations, as well as the proposed sign maximums, any deviations, and then just kind of that window of dimensional window that they could, work the style of the specific sign once the tenant comes on board. And same thing, just the signage locations for each one of them. Same thing here, where you can begin to see the upper story wall signs as well as the ground floor signs for future tenants. E5B, this is the neighbor. I don't want to call it a twin, but it is the neighbor on the same site. So it's an 8-story hotel that's approximately 131,000 gross square feet. Also has ground floor retail, about 6,300, with residential lobby, as well as this one's unique. It has a few walk-up units that face a private street. So when I mentioned, when I was showing you the street grid, that the street grid that you guys approved in the subdivision were for what was going to be the public streets. But there are some private streets that are designated, and possibly, and Adam Jen could speak to this. I know they use a lot of condos and different things in how they do some of the spaces. So again, this one has no on-site parking. It's picked up in E1. But we'll have bicycle. It's about 85 feet tall and stone base with glass in the upper stories, or just a cementitious panel. So what is E5B? Proposed 24 signs for the building. The majority of the signs are actually to be awning and canopy signs that would be 25 square feet. So this is basically the design of the building, utilizes a ground floor canopy that would require the tenants to actually put their signage on top of the canopy, where unlike the other buildings, the future tenants would be able to place signage directly on the wall. So there are ground floor and projecting and wall signs that would be 6 square feet, 3 above ground floor projecting signs to be 30 square feet. And the total square footage is 420, which is well below the 1,200. So no deviations are being requested, but there is no area deviations are being requested, but there is a quantity deviation that is being requested that would take the canopy signs from the 4 that are allowed to 9. And again, this is based on the design of the building, which utilizes a continuous canopy. So again, they follow the same structure as the other 2. So I'm just going to run through this really quickly so you can see that they do indeed show the location of all of the particular signs that are included in plan and in elevation as well. So the last building is E6, which is, we call it Rice Street Residential. So I mentioned that I showed you this one, and now we're moving further east. And it's 8-story residential building, about 250 units, and is just under 300,000 gross square feet. And this one is pretty unique in that there are 2 8-story bars that are joined by kind of an overhead bridge. that is near Cromwell Street. There's a private street that actually goes through, which is actually where there'll be the ground floor units that are there. So the ground floor is approximately 17,000 square feet of retail, and the walk-up units that are lining the private street. And so it also has parking will be in E1, but does have the 89 bicycle parking spaces on site. And it's about 80 feet tall. So what is E6 proposing? Proposes 47 signs for the building. A majority of the signs proposed are again to be awning and canopy that are primarily 25 square feet, but there is one that is much larger. It's 52 square feet. The ground floor projecting sign and wall signs, again, would be 6 square feet. You see these sizes basically are continued throughout all 4 buildings for the most part. There are 6 ground floor wall signs that are a little bit larger at 10 square feet, but well under what the zoning code would allow. Total square footage proposed is approximately 847 square feet, well below the 1,200 in the table 17306. No deviations for area are being requested, but there again is the quantity deviation being requested for the awning and canopy signs that would go from the allowable 4 to 18. And as I mentioned, this deviation is really based on the design of the building. So the screen looks a little bit different, but if you were in the sign plan, this particular table carries on to 2 pages. So I just sliced it so you could see what both pages were on just one screen. So as you can see here, these are your larger ground floor wall signs, but then you go into your typical canopy signs that are just basically shown again at the 25 square feet, and then you're projecting down to the 6 feet. And then your ground floor projecting above ground floor, which is 124. And they're at, I think you can get to 220. So they're fine in terms of area. And again, just have the quantity deviation. So here in the site plan, you can see the location based on the location key that's common throughout all the exhibits. And again, the same thing showing all of the different types of ground floor signage that's being proposed. So I'm just going to do a summary of findings of fact, but wanted to first reiterate what those are. So the Planning Commission must make findings of fact that the signage plan would not increase the likelihood of traffic congestion or distraction, would not add to the visual clutter in the area, and would not be incongruous with the existing or contemplated design of the area. So just kind of walk through a little bit, and these are generally the same for all. Any specifics are in your staff report, but they really are the same given that it's all under construction at the exact same time. The traffic impact, there will be no adverse traffic impact from the proposed signs. Primarily, they're all just ground floor regular signage that you would find on, any new construction building, mixed use building, or any mixed-use building where different tenants are on the ground floor. The proposed billboard on the roof of E1 will only be noticed from a great distance. So this is not going to cause any adverse, problems to the actual traffic that's there, because the rooftop digital sign is not actually meant to be seen from a short distance. Because it's on the roof, it's actually to be part of the skyline and seen for further away. And so none of the projecting wall signs, the larger projecting wall signs, are directly oriented in a driver's line of sight, again, unless you're from a further distance, which is why they are above ground floor. And when you look at the ground floor signage, they're actually really pretty small. You have the 6 feet, you have 10 square feet wall signs. Max, you're going to get 25 square feet on that ground floor. So they're actually taking into account what the driver's line of sight would be or what the traffic condition would be. And the scale of the signs proposed are in line with, as you go actually taller on the building, they actually get bigger. So there won't be any distraction there. In visual clutter, the buildings and the streets are under construction and the design and actually designed as a comprehensive unit. As I mentioned in the beginning, and this is why I wanted to walk through the background, is they were actually designed as a comprehensive unit and actually brought before the Planning Commission in 2019 as a comprehensive unit. So the designs were actually, I guess the benefit of them all being done at the same time is that each of the designs of the buildings as they progress could actually respond to what its neighbor was doing. And so thereby we don't have visual clutter. I don't have any, typical street sections to show you for Atlas or Cromwell Street to talk about what the street design would be or to visually show you what the street design would be. But they're typical street sections. And maybe Adam Jen, I know he's here, could speak a little bit more about, spacing of light poles and different things like that. But what I can say is all of the design of the streets were actually done at the same time as the buildings were as well. So the planning department, the developer, DPW, Department of Transportation, BDC, we all met for many months during 2018 to discuss exactly how wide would the streets be, how much walkway would we have, how much room was left for street furniture. So literally every aspect of this was designed as a unit. So we don't expect that there will be any issues with visual clutter. But of course, the buildings and streets are under construction. So this is the best that we have at the moment. So the design, the building designs again are done to facilitate a more pedestrian connection towards Cromwell Park, Triangle Park to the north, and the other minor streets. And as I mentioned, all the facades along Atlas Street are anticipated to really front a street that will carry anticipated truck traffic, carry bicycles, carry automobiles. So all of these things were anticipated and accounted for in the type of design. And even to this point, to what the future signage would be that you're reviewing right now, as well as the connection to the western and northern facades that will have future buildings and future development. We don't know what that is yet. So based on what we do know, the proposed signage is in keeping with the scale and uses that are proposed for Chapter 1 and for Port Covington as we know it. So the equity summary. The impact, the proposal is for the buildings under construction to have signage that continues to further implement the redevelopment of Port Covington. And so it will have a positive impact in continuing to grow the area. The signage plan does not speak to this as a natural extension of design that future occupants would have signage. So we've anticipated that signage would come. So there's not a negative impact. Buildings have signs, so this is a good thing. Engagement, while the design of the proposed signage specifically, this one should be 6 square feet or this one should be 10, wasn't discussed with the individual associations or neighboring property owners. Weller Development, and I'll even say Sagamore, for many, many years has actually just had continued community engagement that has occurred since master planning and continues through implementation. And I'll just kind of say already that you do have some letters of support from those surrounding entities. So the engagement is ongoing and just continuing. The developer, again, is in continuous communication with them, and I believe actually sits on some of the neighboring boards for some of the planning efforts that are going, I know, involved in like the Middle Branch master planning. So the developer is really working and does have that good line of communication open. Internal operations, and this will have minimal impact on internal operations. We'll just need to review and approve permits based on the sign plan. So notification was given to the South Baltimore Neighborhood Association, South Baltimore Gateway Partnership, Under Armour, 28 Walker, and City Councilman Eric Costello. In addition, the site was posted as required. And as I mentioned, several support letters have been submitted. There is one proposed amendment that I mentioned I would talk about a little bit. I mentioned it earlier, and it's for building E1 in their quantity deviation table. What the amendment proposes is actually just to replace the table that's included in the sign plan that you have, and utilizing the changes outlined in red, you just replace it. So the changes are for the wall signs at ground floor. It's the quantity allowed is 9 in the proposed quantity to match that. And these are just, counting errors and some mistakes. But basically, one of the things I mentioned to you before when I was talking about table 17201 is the wall signs on the ground floor is 1 per 10. So the quantity allowed is essentially the proposed quantity. And that's the same for the projecting sign at the ground floor. So it would be 8 and 8 instead of 11. And the other thing is the wall signs above the ground floor were actually removed. So we're just seeing kind of the updates not meeting each other. So we propose to remove that particular line from the table. And the last thing is the projecting sign above ground floor. So while they are allowed 4 in a previous version, when they were working through this, they were looking to have 2, but they actually ended up with only 1. So these changes need to be reflected in the sign plan adoption. And so with that, staff's recommendation is to amend and approve with the adoption of the findings of fact, and that the proposed signage plan will not increase the likelihood of traffic congestion or distraction, add to the visual clutter in the area, and be incongruous with the existing and contemplated design of the area. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Great job, as always. Let's start off with the commission. Commissioner Allen, do you have any questions for Ms. Woods? Robin? There you go. Yep.
I'm sorry, I had the plan open on Wix and couldn't expand and I'm back.
Do you have any questions for Tamara?
No, it's a lot to take in, but no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Carter.
As much as I'd like to get a little clarification on the clutter, I'm going to refrain from doing that. Great presentation, Tara.
Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, fantastic as always, Tamara. Has there been any pushback or anything on the deviation in number of signs portion of the presentation?
No, we haven't. When you say pushback from who, from the planning department or from the community, where do you think?
Well, the community hasn't, they know about it though. Have they seen it?
We did send out a draft, and as far as I know, based on the letters that are in Wix and that we received, the community actually does support the sign plan.
Okay. That's all I needed to know.
Great. Commissioner Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very complicated plan, and it's an unusual one in that we're actually creating a community and also at the same time making all the roadways, sidewalks, buildings, and signage work together. So I'm very impressed, and I appreciated having the charts plus then looking at both a bird's eye view of as well as facade placement. I think this is quite thoughtful. And I have also appreciated your pointing out the difference between the streets and how the signage would be adjusted for a more pedestrian level kind of identification. We're trying to accomplish a lot here, and these are big buildings, new buildings, mixed use, so signage is going to have to be necessary to help people navigate. So I just wanted to make those comments, and I really appreciated the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tamara, I really want to thank, more than when I usually thank you, I really want to thank you and the entire planning staff. You guys have been incredible and really knee deep in the Port Covington issue for the better part of the last 7 years. And I am very confident in saying that this is a better project because of the work that you've done. Really appreciate everything on the signage plan. Certainly appreciate and concur with Commissioner Collins' comments. I do want to take an opportunity to note, one, I think that your comments, Tamara, on the level of outreach from the Port Covington team, from Weller and its predecessor, Stagmore, has been absolutely excellent. The work that they've done with the communities on the South Baltimore Peninsula that are in the 11th District, and of course, everyone's familiar with their great work hand in hand with the communities of South Baltimore 7 or SB7 that are directly south and southwest of the peninsula, has really been second to none. I'd also like to take an opportunity to point out for the commission, and I recognize that this comment is not germane to the matter that is in front of us today, but I want to reiterate how pleased I am with the Weller team's commitment to the MOU that they engaged with with the city back in 2016. That community benefits agreement is arguably the largest community benefits agreement in the history of the United States of America, representing the second largest urban redevelopment project in the country. And in every single instance, not only has the Port Covington team met what is required by that CBA, which is above and beyond what was required before, but they have gone above and beyond what is required by the CBA or MOU. So I really appreciate their continued work to work with the surrounding communities as well as the entire Baltimore City to ensure that the benefit of Port Covington is really felt by all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Commissioner Horn?
Just have a quick question. This is following up on Victor's question about the quantity deviation table. Can you just remind me what is the sort of the total increase of signs that they were asking? I know one went from 4 to 9 and the other one went to 4 to 18. I was just trying to get the total amount that they're requesting.
So for each building or a specific building?
Each. I'm just trying to get a totality of it.
Okay, let's see. And I have to run back through everything.
Or a range. I'm just wondering in terms of just visual clutter, as one would think, the more signs requested would create visual clutter, but it's your opinion that it wouldn't?
It wouldn't. So here, let me do it this way. What might be kind of a little bit easier on the screen. So I'll just kind of walk through really, really quickly. I know we kind of went through this. So what's happening, I'll just start. So E1 is 25 signs. So what you're seeing, and the reason it becomes so many is the buildings are large. They're full block buildings, and they have, I'll say potential for, as I mentioned, they're still doing lease up. So not 1,000% sure exactly, what tenant is going to get, 1,500 square feet or another's going to get 5,000 square feet or whatever the case may be. But each of those tenants actually will have the ability to have signage. But given that any particular facade is basically a block long, and so when you think about from a design perspective or anywhere where you have a building that's a block long, you potentially could have 4 or 5 ground floor tenants. And each of those tenants for, take a typical coffee shop or something like that, might actually have a wall sign and a projecting sign, and they serve different purposes. So a wall sign is something that you see head on, but projecting signs are actually intended as you're walking down the street. So you actually know what's coming. So from a design perspective, it really is not that many, even though it's a lot of quantity. When you look at the scale of the building that we're attaching them to, it's not bad at all. And some of these may drop off if by chance, and I know Adam can probably speak to this more. I can't speak to their lease up. But if a tenant that, right now they're showing maybe 2 spaces, or perhaps a tenant comes in and says, I want a space that's double the size, then maybe they're only going to take one of those signs, or maybe they'll take 2, depending on the width of their, facade. So, and it's the same, when you get to E5A, they're the same 40 signs. And so, when you look at it from the way I just described, it's not a lot of signs, simply because the buildings are actually massive. You're looking at a building that's 118 feet that is essentially half a block in terms of width, but full block in terms of size. So it's I don't know. Is this
quickly, if I
helpful?
can, let me just interrupt you here real quickly. Councilman Horn, if you look at the page 6 for block E1, they are not requesting any deviation in the total number of signs permitted. In block E5A on page 14, they're requesting 1 additional sign for a wall sign above the ground floor. And then for block E5B, they're requesting 5 additional signs above what is permitted for awning or canopy sign and open structural framework. So my count, to answer your question, is there's a total of 6 additional signs which are being requested above what is permitted by code.
Thank you. And
Oh,
thank you.
wait, let me add one more. Sorry, I forgot block E6. Block E6, they're requesting 14 additional awning or canopy signs for that particular block. They're permitted 4, they're proposing 14. So in total, that would be a total of 20.
20. Okay.
20 additional signs for all 4 buildings. So, and again, based on what Tamara said, that seems pretty nominal.
Yep. Thank you for the clarity. I have no further questions.
Commissioner Priebus, do you have any questions or comments?
2 quick questions. Weller's the applicant, right?
Yes.
And Weller owns all the properties in this plan?
As far as I know.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Commissioner Stevenson.
Just a couple comments. I promise I'll be brief. Thank you, Tamara, for the presentation. I actually like this plan. I think it makes a lot of sense. As Tamara emphasized, it is consistent with the design as contemplated for this area. So I think that it fits in. And it also, without drawing contrast to other plans, seems to take into consideration the experience of people living in the neighborhood. So I think it's a good, well thought out plan.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner Stevenson. Tamara, I only have one question for clarification. So if we were to go to page 5, just as an example, and it's block E1, and it says the proposed maximum square footage permitted for the category 3 electronic sign is 800 square feet, but the proposed maximum width and height is 50 by 20. What I think is happening is, and just make sure that I'm right, is that the applicant is asking for some flexibility. So the sign will not be greater than 800 square feet, and it could be as wide as 50 feet and as high as 25 or 20 feet. But if it's 20 feet high, it can only be 40 feet long, i.e. 800 square feet. And if it's 50 feet long, it can only be 16 feet high. And those dimensions that are being offered are just being offered or being asked for the flexibility, so when they get a tenant in or something like that, that they can maneuver a little bit. Is that fair?
That is fair. And that's one of the specific, I think interesting things about this sign plan and trying to do a sign plan for buildings that are still under construction in some spaces that are not yet leased. There are a lot of unknowns.
Right. Thank you. I think that addresses all of our questions. I see Mr. Jen has his hand up. Mr. Tiso, will you let speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioners, for your time this afternoon. My name is Adam Jen. I'm the Managing Director of Development at Weller Development Company. We're the developer responsible for Port Covington. As you know, Port Covington is one of the largest urban revitalization projects in the United States, with more than 10 acres of roads and rights-of-way and 1.1 million square feet of vertical density under construction. We're pleased to present the sign plans for the vertical elements of Chapter 1B today. And we also thank the SB7 Coalition, the Parks and People Foundation, and the South Baltimore Neighborhood Association for their support of this initiative, as evidenced by their letters of support submitted for the record. This plan is in furtherance of the vertical designs approved at Planning Commission in 2019. And we especially want to thank Tamara Woods, as Councilman Costello did, as have others, the Department of Planning, Councilman Costello, and the City of Baltimore for their continued collaboration. We look forward to the completion and opening of these buildings. Thank you again for your time this afternoon. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Adam. Are there any questions for Mr. Jen from Commissioner?
I have two questions, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
This is Commissioner Previs. There we go. I think you have my video now. Mr. Jen, in preparing this application, did Weller prepare this application on its own and prepare it directly for submission to the Planning Commission?
We engaged best-in-class consultants, including Baltimore City designers in this work, and engaged with the Department of Planning, and per other questions from the group, distributed this to our community partners who ultimately submitted their letters of support.
Did Weller work through any intermediate neighborhood group or nonprofit organization prior to submitting its plan to the Planning Commission?
I don't understand your question, Commissioner. Could you clarify?
Was Weller obligated to sign any contract with any intermediate neighborhood organization for the right to apply to the Planning Commission?
We were not required, but I would refer to Councilman Costello's comments on our community benefits agreement and memorandum of understanding, under which we've constituted the SB7 Coalition, which is the new entity envisioned to coordinate between Port Covington, the South Baltimore 6 communities. So by virtue of the SB7's participation and viewing of the sign plan and our direct engagement therein, in addition to the outreach to other community partners, I would suggest that we have coordinated in accordance with our obligations under the MOU and CBA.
Okay, thank you. And those MOUs are with the community organizations to provide certain community benefits or to otherwise encourage their support. Is that sort of just the typical MOU type scenario that you're talking about?
I would say that our MOU and community benefits agreement are nothing short of groundbreaking. The value is in excess of $100 million. We provide ongoing revenue support from the density in Port Covington that gets distributed 2/3 to the SB6 and 1/3 to a citywide fund, which is distributed by the Baltimore Community Foundation. We've provided over $19 million of direct funding to Baltimore City and the SB6. We continue to work on affordable housing by creation of 20% affordable mixed income offerings in Port Covington. And the list goes on and as it relates to our obligations on local hiring, minority and women's participation, and otherwise. The MOU and CBA are quite robust.
So I'm sorry, I think we were confusing each other. The MOU you're talking about relates to the overall MOU for Port Covington, but there's no specific MOU to this relating to this signage plan. But you're talking about the full MOU for the entire Port Covington project. Is that right?
I'm referring to the Port Covington MOU.
Okay, thank you. There's no specific MOU for this signage plan then. That's what I was kind of going for. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Would the Weller organization agree to a condition whereby it would agree to protect free speech to the same extent as if it were a government organization with respect to this sign approval?
Before you answer that, Mr. Jen, let me break in. So that everybody is absolutely clear, the commission cannot ask for or impose any conditions on an applicant as part of a sign control. Mr. Priebus has been told that repeatedly. Unfortunately, I don't think he's necessarily understanding that. So you do not have to answer that question.
Well, I respectfully disagree. I think if the applicant was willing to agree to do anything, it certainly could say that it was willing to agree to do something. I think that's well established in all of the cases we've ever had before us.
Do you have any other questions, Commissioner Priebus?
Mr. Jen, do you have a position on whether you would agree to a free speech? Would Weller be willing to agree to uphold free speech restrictions on the same level of government if it were to have this approval?
Again, you're not required to answer that, Mr.
You're not required to answer, but you may answer if you wish to.
I'll defer to the chair. Thank you.
Okay, so you don't want to answer that. Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevenson?
No questions. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Donzel, I think, had her hand up and then put her hand down. Melissa, do you want to say anything? Eric, can you unmute Ms. Donzel?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Saw her hand go up and then back down. Go ahead.
Melissa,
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't need to say anything further. Thank you.
All right. So, Eric, we have one caller. If you would just unmute that caller.
We do. And when you hear the two beeps, that's your cue to introduce yourself to the commission if you wish to speak. If not, you can just say no comment or no thank you, and we'll put you back on mute. And you're unmuted now. Very well.
All right.
That's
Seeing
all.
no additional hands up, I close the public hearing. Are there any discussions or deliberations from the commission? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
So moved, Costello.
Thank you, Commissioner Costello. Do I have a second?
Second, Clark.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
I was not able to mute in time. I just wish to maintain my objection that we don't have authorization to impose conditions, particularly where an applicant may agree to the conditions. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Robin Allen,
Approve.
Ted Carter,
Approved.
Victor Clark,
Approve.
Marcia Collin,
Approve.
Eric Costello,
Approve.
Talib Horn,
Approve.
Tom Priebus,
Abstain.
Eric Stevenson,
Approve.
and Sean Davis.
Approve. There being no further business before the commission, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move
So
adjourn.
moved.
So moved.
Y'all have a